All right. Welcome back, everyone. We are launching into our next event on the Global Biodiversity Festival. My name is Joe Grabowski. I'll be your host for this session. I want to give a shout out to everybody as they start tuning in. Thanks so much for joining us live today. It's been an absolutely incredible morning so far, and there is a lot more biodiversity action coming your way throughout today. We're not going to wrap up till 9:30 p.m. Eastern today, so it is going to be a busy one. If you're tuning in, share on social, use the hashtag Global BioFest. If you have a minute to get outside today, tomorrow, or Sunday, take some pictures of some biodiversity in your neighborhood, in your front and backyard. Post them on Instagram and Twitter with the hashtag #BackyardBio. Tag what it is, a mammal, an insect, identify it if you can. We want to see a nice global picture of animals all over the world that you can see in your backyards and neighborhoods. All right. We're going to get rolling today. So excited to have Rodrigo Medellin joining us today. He has worked on the ecology and conservation of bats for over 40 years. He's joining us live from Mexico today. He's a National Geographic explorer at large, and he's got a little message for us today as well. So Rodrigo, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to learn a little bit more about you and your work, and then we'll have a little questions at the end.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Joe. This is amazing. We are all learning new ways of living this new reality. And what you have been doing is amazing. This is incorporating new ways of conveying messages to people. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So let's get started right away. And to do that, I'm going to start sharing my screen for people to see our slides. I think we're ready to roll right now. That is the title of my talk. Um, what you see there is basically the message that I want to convey to all of you. I hope I will convince you that really bats are your true friends. Let's see if I'm successful here. Um, as you probably know, bats are mammals. Bats are just like us. They feed their babies with blood, with with milk, etc. And they are born alive, etc. They are incredibly diverse. There's about 1,400 species of bats around the world. Here, I'm using this slide to convey the incredible diversity that bats have, and that diversity conveys an additional message in terms of the benefits and the services that they provide and the roles that they play in the ecosystem. So in this slide, you only see 12 species of Mexico's 140. Mexico has about 10% of the bats in the world. We're showing here only 12. And in those 12, you can see species of bats with huge ears like this, with tiny ears like that, with big, big eyes like that, with tiny eyes like this one, with really long snouts like that, and very, very short snout like this. So each and every configuration and each and every morphology is telling you something about the natural history of the species. So please keep in mind that a bat is not a bat is not a bat. You cannot say, oh, the bat, the bat, the bat. That is not the case. There's many different roles of these animals, and they are very, very different in the way they look and the way they operate in the ecosystem. I am going to tell you a little bit about the services and the benefits that we get from these bats. The first service that I want to cover is pest control. If you today had your coffee, if you had some corn-based or rice-based meal in the morning, or if you're going to have that for lunch or for dinner, if you're taking any sugar, if you drank any tea, if you're wearing any cotton, you are connected to bats already. So that's why I say that each and every day of our lives is touched by benefits that we get from bats. Bats are the most important pest controllers of many agricultural products that we get. For many years, we have estimated that just in the northern fringe of Mexico, from the state of Sonora to the state of Tamaulipas, bordering with the US, we estimate about 20 to 30 million bats of one species of Mexico's 140, of one species, 20 to 30 million bats. Now, each million bats destroys 10 tons of insects every night. Every night. Just think about it for a second. What would happen if we lose these bats overnight? These pests will just take over our crops, and then we would end up hungry and naked. So thank the bats next time you eat anything. Uh, so 1 in 4 bats consume insects. You're seeing here things that we do have because of the bats. Your cotton t-shirt, your morning coffee, your nachos, your paella, and many more things. The second service that we get is the seed dispersal. You see there, for those friends who are watching us from tropical countries or who have been to tropical countries, I hope many of you have had a chance. You've seen some of these fruits, from pitayas to black zapotes to guavas to zapotillos to white zapotes and even to yerba santa or holy herb, uh, and hundreds of others. We owe them to bats because bats have been dispersing the seeds of these plants for many millions of years. Sure enough, many of those are now in our menu because of the orchards and the farmers that are producing these things. Yes, true. But we have them because bats have been dispersing these things for millions of years. Without them, we wouldn't have them. And in addition, bats are responsible for the recovery of the forest, of the tropical forest. When you see that our tropical forests are disappearing, the forests themselves have their own healing mechanism. The healing mechanisms is right here on the left, on the right of your screen, with that bat dispersing the seeds of that fig tree that is going to grow and recover the forest over time. So really, bats are crucial for seed dispersal and for regeneration of forest. The third example that I want to cover is pollination. You see there a nectar bat visiting the flower of an agave, and that bat is crucial for, especially for Mexico's economy, but I want to cover that in a little bit of time. Now, let me tell you another example of pollination that we get because of bats. This is the ceiba tree. The ceiba tree is one of the biggest trees in the tropical forests of all over the world. And it so happens that it is also the sacred tree of the Maya. When in the Maya world, when you die, your soul climbs up a ceiba tree and reaches heaven that way. Well, guess what? The ceiba tree is pollinated by bats. On the right again, you see a fruit bat that is also feeding on nectar. And all that yellow that you see is the pollen of the ceiba tree. So these bats are really a glorious sight when you see them in the flowering season of the ceiba. All you have to do is look up at night, and you will see these bats hovering and flying and fluttering around, visiting all of these flowers and getting completely covered with that pollen that you're seeing there. And of course, that pollen is also ingested, but many grains of that pollen are going to end up in another ceiba flower, and therefore we are going to have the ceiba seeds to promote and to regenerate the ceiba population all around the world. And then, of course, for several years now, we have launched the bat-friendly tequila and mezcal. I have directed this project in collaboration with the tequila industry and the mezcal industry. Uh, as you know, the tequila and mezcal industries represent billions of dollars, several $billion for the Mexican economy, and there's more than 50,000 people in Mexico that depend on that type of economic activity for their livelihoods. Well, guess what? All of that is connected to this beautiful bat that you're seeing, the lesser long-nosed bat, the Mexican long-nosed bat, and the long-tongued bat. These three bats are the main pollinators of agaves, and we finally were able, about 4 years ago, to convince the tequila industry to allow a few agaves that you see on the lower left of the screen to flower. That is a tequila field. And the tequila field, they allow 5% of the agaves to flower. And then, of course, the bats come in and visit the flowers, and they exchange pollen from flower to flower, from plant to plant, and that promotes the genetic diversity of agaves. We have this program in many places in Mexico, and we are now, you can find it in your neighborhood. Look for this label here, the Bat Friendly Tequila and Mezcal, sponsored by the UNAM, by the University of Mexico, my home institution, and the Tequila Interchange Project, which is part of the industry that is fully committed for the recovery of the genetics of a plant and the conservation of the bats themselves, and of course, providing you with the best possible product in terms of tequila or mezcal. So the next tequila or mezcal that you drink, please raise your glass, and the first sip, give it a toast to bats. Bats need it, bats deserve it, and you will feel much better. Okay, so let's jump right into this thing that that has us all stuck in our homes, most of us, the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. This is a human virus. Don't be deceived. No animal can give you SARS-CoV-2 and therefore COVID-19. No animal, including bats. That means that if a bat flutters around you, that is not going to give you coronavirus. That if a bat comes into your home, that is not going to give you COVID at all. If you go in a cave, it's not going to give you COVID-19. There is absolutely no risk of that. Let me tell you why. Even if some crazy scientist out there grabs the bat SL-CoV coronavirus from the bat that is 96% similar to SARS-CoV-2, and they take that bat virus and put it in your body, it will not be able to enter your cells. It doesn't have the right key to open the lock and get into your cells. Its spike protein is the wrong configuration for our cells, so it wouldn't be able to infect us at all right? So think for a second. We share 99% of our genetic material with chimpanzees. Do we exchange genes with chimpanzees? Of course not. Of course not. The only thing that may have happened is that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID, and the bat SL-CoV may have shared an ancestor. Who knows how long ago? Who knows? The issue here today is that the over 5 million people who have been diagnosed with the virus have been infected by human beings, not by a civet, not by a pangolin, and certainly not by a bat. All right? Okay, so what do we do now that we're in this situation with coronavirus around us? Well, let's think for a second that it's not that we need to look for the culprit and turn into the Red Queen and go off with their heads. No, the culprit is right there in our mirror. Just look at yourself in the mirror, and that is the culprit. We have all the responsibility that we are in this pandemic right now. So for the next pandemic, what we can do is the first line of defense against the next pandemic is biodiversity conservation and ecosystem protection. Let me tell you why. There is something called the dilution effect. This dilution effect basically says, and it has been tested in many, many diseases, and this particular case is for Lyme disease. For Lyme disease that is transported to us by ticks, right? Well, it turns out that little figure of a man, his 50% Lyme, this 50% chances that you get Lyme disease in an undisturbed ecosystem like in the left with lots and lots of species. Why? Because the host that contains the Lyme disease pathogen is diluted. There's many other species of mice and mammals and other things that keep the host diluted. But then humans come in and, and disturb the ecosystem and deforest the ecosystem and fragment the ecosystem. And then one or two of those opportunistic species become super abundant, and then the Lyme disease becomes super abundant, and then you have a much greater chance, illustrated there by the figure of a man with a much greater percentage of its body in lime color, indicating Lyme disease, because basically it is living in a disturbed ecosystem. So if we had undisturbed ecosystem, the pathogens would be there, their hosts would be there, but they would be diluted. The probabilities that we get those diseases will be much, much lower if we contain, if we protect the ecosystem, if we respect the ecosystem, and if we have a good, relationship with biodiversity. I also want to tell you that killing animals, bats or otherwise, solves absolutely nothing. If you're killing, and there's many countries, unfortunately, where they're killing bats or pangolins or civets or snakes or anything like that, that solves absolutely nothing, nothing. Because like I said, it's not an animal that is going to give us COVID. It's a human being. We only get it from human beings. That's it. So regulating and reducing illegal, unsustainable bushmeat consumption may help mitigate the next pandemic. True. So protection of the ecosystem and reducing the illegal, the unregulated and unsustainable consumption of bushmeat. That's another element that we need to promote. We need to sponsor. Please think about it and get engaged into that. We have also another need, which is to lower our consumption of animals, including domestic animals. I mean, look at that. That is a typical, your very typical chicken farm. Really industrialized chicken farm. That looks like Times Square in New Year. It's of course a very fertile setting for any pathogen to rise among the chickens and then spill over to us. Remember the avian flus of past years? Well, guess what? It comes from that. So we need to come to grasp with the new realities that we need, new policies to manage the animals that we consume, from pigs to cattle, to bovine cattle, to chickens, to eggs, to many other things. We need to, number one, make sure that we're respecting the animal's rights. Number two, make sure that the animal health is in perfect shape. And that is going to give us a healthy meat to keep consuming. In this case, then, we need to lower our consumption of animals and make sure that the animals that we consume were happy and we're healthy. And then we'll be fine. So please, when you think about this COVID-19, please leave bats alone. Bats are not to blame. Regardless what you hear in the news, there are some scientists that are saying that if a bat flies around you, you might be infected. That is absolutely not true. That's a very clear and blatant lie. Share bats are not to blame with a hashtag there with your friends, with your family, in the office, at work, etc. And focus on the facts. Remember that most pandemics arise from a combination of ecosystem degradation, unsustainable illegal bushmeat trade, and poor farm animal management. Reflect on the services and the benefits and the goods that we get, all of the products that we get that touch every day of our lives that we have because of bats. Bats are your friends. Please remember this message. Bats need your help. Please help us protect bats. Bats need you, and we certainly need bats. I think I'm going to stop there. Joe, if there are any questions, I'll be very glad to take them.
Absolutely, Rodrigo. Thanks for that amazing presentation and that, I mean, just crucially important message that bats do so much for us, and that if we villainize them, if we, we try to eliminate them, we're only hurting ourselves and we're not stopping what we're trying to prevent. So thank you so much for that message today. I think it's really important, especially in light of what's happening globally right now.
Exactly.
All right, we do have a few questions starting to come in via the Slido. So Natasha is really curious. She wants to know your favorite species of bat and why.
Well, I have many favorite species of bats, but probably my top number one is the last one in my presentation, which is the biggest bat in the New World, Vampirum spectrum. It has an unfortunate, very daunting Latin name, Vampirum spectrum. It's not a vampire and it's not a specter. It's a big bat that feeds on rats and on birds and on other bats. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I've been lucky enough to have National Geographic produce a special with me showing my research on these bats that, of course, are endangered everywhere. We don't know anything about them. Please find out Vampirum spectrum. I have a YouTube channel, Rodrigo Medellin, where you can find that species and many more.
All right, perfect. Great question to get us started. So the next question we have coming in is from Yazini, and they are wondering about, so after, human misconceptions, which is, we obviously have against them, what's the next biggest threat that bats are facing?
The next biggest threat is it's actually stemming from human misconception, and it's the vandalism in caves. People just fear bats or challenge each other, mostly like teenagers. I dare you to go and throw a rock at the bats, and they unfortunately go, and they can be either burning caves or dynamiting caves or gassing bats in caves. Those are the second biggest threat to bats. We can all help in this fight to save bats. Please defend them and please educate people around you and dispel all of these crazy myths that have no foundation, that bats are filthy, that bats are ugly, that bats are giving you all kinds of diseases. Absolutely not true.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for that question, Yazini. We have another question that just came in. This is an interesting one. Do wind turbines affect bats? And is there something we can do to mitigate that?
Oh my God, what an amazing question. Thank you for that question. Unfortunately, yes, the wind turbines, and we published a paper with friends from Canada and the United States a few years ago showing that just in the United States, there's about 600 to 800,000 bats that are being killed every year just in the US, just in the US. And the way to mitigate that mortality is so easy, so inexpensive, and so ineffective. Let me tell you real quick how that works. Wind turbines come with a kick-in speed, with a switch that starts the blades turning at a wind speed that's very low, which is about 3 meters per second. 3 meters per second. There's a lot of insects out there, and there's a lot of bats feeding on those insects. If we change that switch to 6 meters per second only, at 6 meters per second, the wind is a lot stronger. It's still a breeze, but the wind is stronger. The insects cannot control their flight, so they grab onto any surface, and therefore the bats stop flying around. That in itself lowers mortality by about 50 to 60%, and it costs the average wind energy company 1% of the energy that is generated by that particular wind turbine. So for 1%, you're saving 50%. I'm sorry, that's a no-brainer. Let's talk to our wind companies, our energy companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. Sometimes, the easy solutions are there. We just need to get that word out.
Exactly.
All right.
And get the consumers on board. Get the consumers educated, learning about these messages, and bringing them along.
All right. Well, Rodrigo, we are had such a blast having you join us today and share that really important message, because at the end of the day, there's so much false information going on, and there are animal species that are being demonized for just things that aren't true, right? Alternate facts, we'll say. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so we are going to start now doing live handoffs. So we want to keep the stream running as long as we can so people don't have to switch to the different stream. So bear with us because this could get a little bit experimental. But again, Rodrigo, I want to thank you again so much for joining us live from Mexico today. You're doing incredible work, and we will definitely look forward to hosting you again sometime in the future and sharing more of your work.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's been a pleasure being with you, and enjoy the rest of the program, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Rodrigo.